It's been more than 2 decades since Baldur's Gate 2 Shadows of Arm was released, but the wait for a sequel is finally over as Baldur's Gate 3 has landed on PC and PS5, and with a bit of luck it'll be coming to Xbox Series as well. The second Baldur's Gate sequel sees players taking on the role of an adventurer who is in the unfortunate position of being host to a mind flayer parasite, a small tadpole-like creature that lives in the brain after entering through the eye and turns its host into a mind flayer after a few terrifying days. Hooray! It's a race against time then to find a healer that can remove the parasite, and unfortunately, it's not an affliction that your local GP's going to be able to prescribe antibiotics for.
Baldur's Gate 3 isn't just about horrifying medical maladies, however. It's a rich tapestry of a game, full to bursting with exciting locales to explore, monsties to fight, and interesting characters to charm. Or if you beef that deception check with your stinky old Nat 1, upset greatly. With an average review score of 96 out of 100, Baldur's Gate 3 isn't just one of the best video games of 2023, it's one of the best video games ever, and one of the main reasons for that is its varied cast of characters, including the array of individuals that players can sign up to their adventuring party.
But who should be at your side no matter what, and who'd be better off remaining in camp forevermore? There's only one way to settle this. Fight! A ranked list. Just as good. First though, we'd better establish the rules of engagement. We've played dozens of hours of Baldur's Gate 3 and consulted the internet in order to determine which companions are worth keeping around and which should be avoided at all costs. We're basing our rankings on a number of factors, including how useful each character is in combat, whether they're good at anything that doesn't involve slaughtering, how interesting their quest line is, and what they're like as people. Naturally, this one is largely opinion-based, so apologies if you don't agree with us, but that's just how the Baldur's Gate 3 cookie doth crumble.
Finally, we should warn you that because of the nature of this list, we will need to talk plot points, so a spoiler warning is in effect.
All of that nice and clear? Then let's rank 'em. I'm Barbarian Ben.
And I'm Paladin Peter from TripleJump, and here is every Baldur's Gate 3 companion ranked from worst to best.
Number 10. Minthara. According to the support group Bad Anon in Disney's Wreck-It Ralph, not being good isn't a bad thing. However, in the case of Baldur's Gate 3's Minthara, I'm afraid we'd have to disagree. First encountered in the Shattered Sanctum in the Goblin Camp in Act 1, Minthara can be found planning the attack on the Druid Grove. In order to set out on the path to recruiting her to the party, players will need to disregard the wishes of the Druid, Halsin, and side with Minthara and the Goblins. She's later encountered in Act 2, being tortured in the Moonrise Towers, and after rescuing her, the player can invite her into the fold. A Drow Paladin, Minthara has some decent stats behind her, including a +6 to initiative, meaning she'll generally be one of the first to land a blow in any battle, and proficiency in intimidation and persuasion, which means she can talk the talk as well as walking the walk. She has a wide variety of spells at her disposal, including those all-important Healy Boys, and as an Oath of Vengeance paladin, she gets Inquisitor's Might, a bonus action that gives either her or a companion +2 radiant damage and the chance to daze enemies. The reason we placed Minthara at the bottom of our list, however, is due to the fact that recruiting her will result in losing out on other party members. The assault on the Druid Grove will upset everyone in camp except for Astarion and Lae'zel, and Karlach, Wyll, and Halsin will completely abandon the player over it. On paper, Minthara would be a great addition to the party, but her nefarious motivations severely limit players' choices when it comes to allies, and for that, we dub her the worst. Also, planning to assault the Druid Grove. That's a paladin. Number 9. Lae'zel. I don't care what anyone says, it's nice to be nice, a memo that Githyanki fighter Lae'zel clearly never got. Lae'zel is one of the first creatures the player character meets that isn't trying to jam slugs into their eyeballs, but that doesn't make her any more pleasant to deal with. Personality-wise, she is rude, abrasive, bloodthirsty, and at times downright cruel. Plus, like all of those of her race, she's basically a Githyanki supremacist, and as such, looks down on everyone and won't entertain any idea about removing the parasites that isn't find the creche. After meeting her on the Mind Flayer ship, players can recruit her into their party in Act 1 by rescuing her from the tieflings that are holding her captive. Not that she'll be particularly grateful, nor will she be all that useful once she's on board. With low charisma and only average intelligence and wisdom, Lae'zel is fairly useless outside of a fight, and despite talking a big talk, she can't even reliably intimidate people owing to the -1 she gets to charisma checks. In combat though, she's reasonably valuable. Proficient with simple and martial weapons, short, long and great swords, as well as light, medium and heavy armor and shields means that she's really rather versatile, and a base speed of 9 meters makes her pretty darned nippy as well. Being a fighter, she also gets Second Wind, which allows her to heal herself, and at level 3 she gets a subclass, either Battlemaster, which gives her maneuvers and superiority dice to fuel them, Eldritch Knight, which brings a little magic into proceedings, or Champion, which reduces the number required to roll a critical hit by 1, amongst other features. Still, being a competent fighter doesn't make you a good person, and until she adjusts her attitude, Lae'zel can hang out at the bottom of the heap with Minthara and the other meanies. Number 8. Wyll. Oh, thank the maker, we finally made it to a companion that isn't a complete dickhead. Sadly, although Wyll is a nice enough bloke, we are unable to recommend that you add him to your party unless you feel like you're missing a bit of eye candy. With that said though, fit lads doth slaughter no goblins, so bear that in mind when you're filling your party exclusively with hotties, alright? Players meet Wyll early in Act 1 as goblins attack the Druid Grove and can recruit him to their party immediately after the battle is over. Being a warlock, he has something of a dirty little secret, and that secret is that his magical powers were acquired through a bargain with a devil, an arrangement that Wyll is keen to break free of. Naturally, his stats favour charisma, as this is the ability that fuels his spellcasting, but Wyll also has decent constitution, intelligence, and dexterity. Just don't ask him to open any heavy doors, because then you'll be plops out of luck. Proficiency-wise, Wyll can be counted on for animal handling, arcana, intimidation, and survival checks, and he's able to use a variety of different weapons as well as light armor and even shields if you fancy a cheeky AC boost. Sadly, Wyll suffers from the same issue as all warlocks, and that is a severe lack of spell slots, and whilst Eldritch Blast is a cantrip so can be fired at will, no pun intended, and does decent damage for a cantrip, it doesn't make up for the fact that poor Wyll gets tired after just one Witch Bolt, especially if said Witch Bolt fails to hit. If your party is missing a jack of all trades, then Wyll is probably your guy, but considering that's not really the point of having several companions, he's likely better off just kicking back at camp and trying to find an exit clause in his contract.
Number 7. Halsin. We'll address the elephant, or rather bear, in the room first, shall we? Yes, Halsin is a druid. Yes, Halsin can turn into a bear. Yes, you can romance Halsin whilst he's in bear form. Go on, get the giggles out now, because we won't be talking about this again. When players first meet Halsin, he's being held captive in a cage by a bunch of goblins, though on first glance, the wood elf druid could easily be mistaken for a standard grizzly bear. A standard grizzly bear he ain't though, and by freeing him and siding with the Druid Grove, players will embark on the path to recruiting the sometimes fur-laden lad to their party. Once Staniel and Oliver have been rescued in the Shadow-cursed lands in Act 2, an invite to join the party can be extended, and players will finally have the bare necessities of life. Naturally, Halsin's main draw is his Wild Shape ability, which allows him to transform into a variety of creatures and is useful both in and out of combat. He's also proficient with a variety of different weapons, as well as a number of outdoorsy skills, such as nature, animal handling, and survival, and can cast a variety of offensive, defensive, and support spells, all of which come together to make him a reasonably reliable tank and/or support character. Like our pal Wyll, however, Halsin struggles a bit on the spell slot front until he's leveled up a few times. Plus, he's only able to wild shape twice per short rest, meaning that once he's done the animal thing a couple of times, he needs to stop for a little nap. Put simply, Halsin isn't a bad choice for those looking for someone to charge into the fray and occasionally dish out the heals, but if you're willing to expend 2 party slots on support and tank characters, there are better options. Number 6. Jaheira. I'm not gonna lie, it was a real struggle trying to decide in which order to place Halsin and Jaheira, but although being able to get it on with a big bear is impressive, Jaheira does have slightly more to bring to the druid table. Players don't meet Jaheira until Act 2, where she can be found at the Last Light Inn. She's more difficult to recruit than some, but not because there's a convoluted path to keeping her on side. Players more or less just need to keep her alive. If you've played Baldur's Gate 3 though, you'll know that that can be easier said than done. Jaheira has many of the same trappings as other druids. She can wild shape, cast a variety of different spells of the offensive, defensive, and support flavors, has proficiencies in nature and animal handling, and is an all-round decent tank/support character. Equally, she suffers from a slight spell slot and wild shape charge shortage, so what puts her ahead of Halsin in our book? Well, it's her sub-race features that tip the scale in her favour. Like Halsin, Jaheira has elven lineage, but rather than a wood elf, she's a half-high elf. She still gets a base racial speed of 9 meters, 12 meters of dark vision, weapon proficiency with spears, pikes, halberds, and glaives, armor proficiency with light armor and shields, and Fey ancestry, which gives her an advantage on saving throws against being charmed and prevents her from magically being put to sleep. But thanks to her ancestry, she also gets a cantrip from the wizard spell list. Her cantrip of choice is Firebolt, an offensive spell that does a whopping 1d10 fire damage. Ultimately, Halsin and Jaheira are, on stats level at least, very similar characters, and it all really comes down to whether players would like a little extra movement speed or a bit of fire in their lives. Number 5. Astarion. He might be the internet's Baldur's Gate 3 thirst trap of choice, but is Astarion worth having around? Well, I suppose it depends on how much you like having blood in your veins. Indeed, perhaps the least surprising reveal in the game is that Astarion is a vampire, and although the Mind Flayer tadpole has given him the ability to walk in the sun unscorched, he still needs to chow down on a hearty portion of blood every so often, or he'll slowly weaken. But seriously, my dude, if you don't want people to know you're a vampire, maybe try a new look, because your current one is a dead giveaway. On the plus side though, Astarion is reasonably useful in most situations. Expertise in sleight of hand and stealth makes him great at picking locks and nicking things, and proficiency in perception means he can spot a trap in a dark room from 300 paces. I may or may not be exaggerating slightly there, but if there is a trap nearby, you can almost guarantee that Astarion will spot it and can disarm it with ease. In combat, options are a little limited unless you go down the arcane trickster route, which grants a handful of spells, though sneak attack with its additional 1d6 damage is always a good bet if you've got a companion in melee range of an enemy, and cunning action dash, disengage, and hide are great for getting the vampire out of trouble in a pinch, especially as he's not all that tough. Like Wyll, Astarion is something of a jack of all trades, but his scouting abilities give him the edge over the warlock, even if there is a risk that you'll wake up in the night to find him chomping on your neck. You might be into that though, and frankly, who am I to judge?
Number 4. Gale. Look everyone, we've got ourselves a wizard and a thumping good un, I'd wager, once he's trained up a little bit. Indeed, proving that you don't need to be tough as long as your opponent is in fireball range, it's Gale, the human wizard that players can pull from a portal towards the beginning of Act 1. This suave, cheery chappie is keen to join the party, and it's very easy to get him on board. Simply yank him from the magical hole into which he's fallen and follow the preceding dialogue tree. 10 out of 10 for simplicity there. Those familiar with Dungeons & Dragons will know that wizards are notoriously squishy, but don't let that put you off, because what Gale lacks in brawn, he more than makes up for in spell casting ability. Right out of the gate, Gale can use spells like Firebolt, a cantrip that deals 1d10 fire damage, Chromatic Orb, which can dish out up to 3d8 thunder damage, and Magic Missile, which may be less impressive in the damage stakes, but it cannot miss even if you roll a stinky nat 1. It is worth noting, however, that aside from being something of a glass cannon, Gale also has another fatal flaw. He has to ingest magic items every so often, otherwise he'll sort of explode. And I don't mean like the Martians in Mars Attacks, I mean more like an atomic bomb. What this means is that players will need to keep a few mystical doodads on hand at all times just in case their wizard gets the magical munchies, which is all well and good, but such items aren't exactly cheap, and it's quite heartbreaking watching your spellcaster nom down a pair of boots that you could have gotten several hundred gold for. Gale, no! Spit it out! Still, his positive attributes outweigh the negatives, and besides, I'm sure you'll forget all about the whole kaboom thing while you're having space sex. Yeah, that's right. Number 3. Karlach. When we think of big women in video games, usually it's Resident Evil Village's Lady Dimitrescu that comes to mind. However, thanks to Baldur's Gate 3, there's a new big woman in town, and she might just have stolen our hearts. Now, she may look like she's crawled straight out of hell, which it just so turns out that she actually has, but Karlach is really a complete sweetheart. The burly tiefling barbarian can be found just to the east of the toll house at the end of the Risen Road, and as long as players haven't sided with the goblins and attacked the Druid Grove, she's more than happy to join the fray. Being a barbarian, Karlach is a tanky queen who's right at home wherever battle is thickest. She's proficient in intimidation, as one might expect from a hulking creature that looks somewhat like a devil, as well as nature, perception, and animal handling. Just because you're big and muscly doesn't mean you don't want to pet all the kitties, yeah? Because she's a Zariel tiefling, Karlach gets 12 meters of dark vision, hellish resistance, which means she only takes half as much damage from fire, and thaumaturgy, which grants her advantage on intimidation and performance checks. The rage feature that Karlach's barbarian class gives her is a brawler's dream, not only granting her +2 with melee and improvised weapons, but also giving her resistance to physical damage and advantage on strength checks and saving throws. Furthermore, she also gets to add her constitution modifier to her armor class whenever she's not wearing armor, making her practically unstoppable. She might be lacking in the intelligence stakes, but Karlach knows that she's built for kicking ass and taking names, and she does it really bloody well, even if she probably can't spell said names when she takes them. Peter?
Number 2. Minsc. If we're ranking Baldur's Gate 3 companions from least to most badass, then Minsc would definitely take the number 1 spot. This human ranger was first introduced in Baldur's Gate 1, and makes one hell of a grand re-entrance in Baldur's Gate 3 when he crawls out of the mouth of a mimic. To recruit Minsc, players will first need to ensure that they've managed to keep Jaheira alive, as her presence in the party is key to convincing Minsc that he's been dealing with a Jaheira doppelganger. Following this, he's able to seek out his hamster companion, Boo, the most adorable little guy we've ever seen, and players can bring both Minsc and Boo into the fold. He may be pure beefcake and the dictionary definition of himbo, but Minsc is one dexterous lad, though despite this, he's only got an initiative of +3. Still, he's proficient in all things outdoorsy, so animal handling, nature, and survival, as well as stealth, persuasion, and perception. He gets favored enemy at level 1, which grants an additional proficiency in a spell, and natural explorer, which will either allow him to cast Find Familiar, gain proficiency in sleight of hand, or become resistant to cold, fire, or poison damage depending on which flavor is chosen. At level 2, he gains a fighting style, each of which grants him a different boon, and at level 3, players who choose the Beastmaster subclass can give him an animal companion to aid him in battle. He also gets points for being voiced by Matt Mercer, who is widely regarded to be one of the best dungeon masters in the entire world. The only thing that lets this fan favourite down is the absence of a companion quest, and honestly, it feels like Larian missed a trick by bundling his recruitment in with Jaheira's story. We still love him though, and we especially love his hamster pal. And number 1, Shadowheart. It turns out that, according to our research at least, the most useful Baldur's Gate 3 companion is also the first one that players can recruit. Funny how things work out sometimes, isn't it? Assuming players free Shadowheart from her pod on the Mindflayer ship, she can be found on the beach just a little way from where the player character first wakes up following the prologue. To recruit her, one simply needs to have a conversation with her, and bing bang boom, you've got your first companion. Huzzah! So why is Shadowheart the best? Well, allow me to fill you in. Firstly, she's a healer, which is always incredibly handy. At lower levels, she can utilize Healing Word to restore a few hit points to a creature she can see, and once level 6 spells are available, she can cast Heal, which can restore a whopping 70 HP to a creature she can touch. She also has a decent number of spell slots. She gets Disguise Self, Charm Person, and Blessing of the Trickster from her domain, and can do serious damage with spells like Guiding Bolt, which even at level 1 does 4d6 radiant damage. She may not be much use in melee range, but stick her in the back and have her slinging those Guiding Bolts with reckless abandon, and those enemies don't stand a chance. Perhaps the best thing about having Shadowheart on the team, though, is the Guidance cantrip. This unassuming little spell can be cast as many times per day as Shadowheart would like, and can be used to add a cheeky little 1d4 to skill checks. Now that little pyramid-shaped dice might not seem like much, but sometimes it's the difference between success and failure, and our writer has lost count of the number of times her Drow Warlock's bacon has been saved by Shadowheart's guidance. It must be at least like, I don't know, 4? Man, invaluable.